Good afternoon, Endeavour. We couldn't leave it like that, could we? Not for a whole weekend. I want to know what's going to happen to Becky and Jimbo as they make their way up to Coruisk. Is this fisherman going to catch up with them? Let's see what happens. Better than any Saturday night telly, this, isn't it? We didn't need a torch. The lobster fisherman was wrong. The night wasn't pitch black. 10 minutes after we set off, threads of grey cloud dissolved to reveal a perfect full moon suspended above the sea. It felt like walking through a scene from the Son of Dracula, but at least we could see where to put our feet. A good job too, the path was narrow and stony and cut into the steep, scrubby cliff rising high above the water. We had to duck under the gnarled trunks, clamber over boulders and move fallen branches out of our way. The sea lay to our left like a great sheet of beaten silver. To our right, rocks, trees and bushes climbed up into the night sky. Out in the bay, an island floated like a great barnacled whale. Beyond it, the ocean, blackness and stars. Everything looked mind-bogglingly big. I was lonely and frightened even with Becky in front of me. If we tripped and fell, we'd helter-skelter down into the icy water and be swept away. No one would ever know. To make matters worse, my city folk trainers were not made for the trek and I was getting large, painful blisters on my right heel. I stuffed the shoe with tissues, gritted my teeth and marched manfully onwards. After 2 hours, we reached the bay of Camasunari. The path dropped down and the cliff flattened out into a gentle, sloping meadow of spiky grass. We crested a small ridge and the beach lay in front of us. We crossed a tiny stream and stepped into a field. "Geez," I said. "Now that does my head in," echoed Becky. The field was full of rabbits. 100, 200. I'd never been frightened of rabbits before, but this lot gave me the creeps, sitting there with their powder-puffed tails and their spoony ears like something from a horror film called Rabbit. "Let's keep going," I said. We began the second, more difficult section of the path, except there wasn't much of a path anymore. There were rocks and nettles, thorns, trees, mud, and my blister was getting worse. After half an hour of slipping, tripping, grumbling and hobbling, we came to an unexpected halt. In front of us lay a smooth, steep face of blank rock covered in patches of moss, like a giant granite nose. No mud, no branches, no clumps of grass. Nothing. Starting high above our heads, it swooped down to a ragged edge hanging over the surface of the black water. The map called it Bad Step. You could see what the map meant. "You first," I said. "You're older." "Thanks, Jimbo," Becky replied. "You're a real gent." We couldn't go up and around. We couldn't go down and under either. The slope was too steep. We had to go over. Becky shimmied up. I shimmied up behind her, and we lay face down on the rock, spread-eagled like sunbathing lizards, shuffling gingerly sidewards. We were doing all right. My trainers were rubbish for walking, but the rubber soles stuck pretty well to the rock. Sadly, the moss didn't. I was halfway across when I put my foot on a clump of the stuff and I shifted my weight and it tore away beneath me. I shot downwards, braked only by my knees, my fingers and the end of my nose. My heart stopped and my feet slid over the edge into space. I heard Becky scream and I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable plunge through the air onto the pointy rocks half submerged into the freezing water below. But I stopped. My legs dangling in the empty air. My fingers were jammed into a crack that ran across the surface of the stone. It was a narrow crack and my fingers were hurting. I wasn't able to hang for so long. I tried to swing my legs onto the rock, but I was too far over. "Jimbo!" Becky shouted. "Hang on!" I looked. She was shifting herself slowly down the giant nose towards me with the hold all looped over her shoulder. "There's a crack," I said. And at that moment one of my hands slipped free and I screamed. The toe of Becky's boot found the crack. She took me to the hold-all off her shoulder and lowered it down to me. "Grab this." I grabbed it quick. "Now pull." She pulled. I pulled. The handle stretched horribly. I swung my right leg. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally I got it over the lip of the rock. I heaved again and pulled. She heaved again and I got my foot over the lip and lay flat against the stone, panting. We waited until we got our breath back, then started shuffling sidewards with our toes in the crack. We rounded the curve of the rock and were able to grab a gnarly root and swing ourselves onto the safety of the damp earth. "Holy hot dogs, Batman," said Becky. "That was close." I put my hand to my face and realised that my nose was bleeding where I'd used it as a brake pad. Well, she said, you don't get this kind of excitement at school, do you? Coruisk caught us by surprise. The path led down to sea level, where we found our way blocked by a little channel leading to the shore. We turned and followed the channel island upwards. We crossed over a rocky hump and the loch loomed into view. Several billion gallons of cold, dark water stretched away in front of us. Coruisk, said Becky, standing on the rocky hump like someone who had just climbed Everest. We did it, kiddo. Around the loch on every side the Cullen Hills rose into the night. The central strip of water shone blue in the moonlight, but the distant banks vanished in the soot-black shadows of the peaks. High above us, plumes of mist were forming on the very tips of the mountains and trailing off into the star-filled sky. The sea had seemed big, stretching out to the dark horizon, but the size of the silhouetted mountains made the loch seem even bigger. The silence was complete. There were waves on the sea, and the sound of the water lapping against the rock. The water here was as smooth and motionless as mercury. This was not a place where human beings were meant to be after dark. So, said Becky, what's our next trick? I thought about Charlie. I don't know. I could feel tears pricking at the corner of my eyes. We'd spent 2 days getting to this place. We'd risked our lives. I don't know what I was expecting to find when I got here. I did expect to find something at least. And this was the emptiest place I'd seen in my entire life. Chin up, said Becky. Let's fix ourselves some dinner. We trudged along the edge of the channel and crossed over using a series of stepping stones and looked for a good camping spot. En route we found ruins of an old cottage that for a few seconds looked like it might offer a clue to why Coruisk was so important. But it was a ruin. 4 crumbling walls, a doorway, 2 window holes, a mud floor. We climbed up to a flat area of grass neatly protected from prying eyes and a growing wind by a large oval boulder. Becky erected the tent behind the big stone. I got out some plasters and antiseptic wipes, and once we were snuggled in our sleeping bags we broke out bread and cheese. Well fed and footsore, we lay on our backs and looked up at the stars. Becky jammed her iPod earphones in and listened to some of her rubbish music, or whatever else she'd recently downloaded. I tried to remember the names of some of the constellations. The Bear, the Plough, Orion. Finally I zipped up the tent and pulled the sleeping bag around my neck and closed my eyes. Moaned Becky tunelessly, and then she stopped. She took out one of her earpieces, shook it, stuck it back in, and then tore it out again. A strange bubbling noise was coming out of one of the tiny speakers. Oh, it's broken, she snapped. Again. Your watch, I gasped. Look at your watch. She looked at her watch and the face had lit up and the hand was spinning backwards. Ouch, she yelled, ripping it off my wrist. It's hot. Somewhere inside the holdall, the torch was turning on and off. And 2 seconds later, the whole tent was bathed in brilliant, bright blue. Neon blue. Light. Have a great week.